Welcome to the most important week of the year for the podcast industry. Welcome to Podcast Movement 2025.
We just got the all clear. Wonderful. We're on red headphones, everyone. So if you are looking at me moving my mouth and you can't hear me, make sure you're turned to red. And we're going to talk about how to grow your podcast using digital media buying. So there's some non-traditional ways that you can use paid media budgets or campaigns in order to reach new listeners in places that you may not have considered before. And we're going to walk through some tips and strategies for that. But first, I want to kind of turn it over to Brett, who's the co-founder of the Audience Lift platform that we both work with, to tell you a little bit more about why we started the platform in the first place.
Thanks for coming. Appreciate it. I'm Brett Sklar. So we started Audience Lift platform about a year and a half ago. Our background as a company is about in 2019, we started to produce podcasts for brands. We had some nice clients entrust us to build their podcasts for their corporations. And we thought that, okay, no problem, easy to build a podcast. What we learned really quickly is finding an audience, growing an audience, and audio was really hard. And so we decided to go down the road of could we maybe take people from digital and convert them over to audio listeners? And we set down that path and built a great team and some great tools to help do that. So that's our background.
Yeah, so hopefully what we're going to do is kind of get you up to speed on all the mistakes that we made in helping podcasters grow and use their audience so you can not have to repeat those mistakes. And here's the three things that I promise that we're going to get from this talk. So first, we're going to talk about where you can actually advertise your podcast online. Like, where are the places where you should look to potentially test running some campaigns and trying to get some accelerated growth and find new listeners. So we're going to walk through different places you can advertise that you may not have considered before. We're also going to walk through how to create a digital podcast advertisement. What does that look like? What are some best practices? And how do you put your best foot forward when you're trying to promote yourself and get in front of new people that may not know who you are, what you talk about, but you're introducing yourself for the first time. We're also going to talk about some tips for success. So as you venture into paid media, paid marketing to grow your audience, there's some landmines to avoid, some pitfalls we want to help you steer clear of, and some things to keep in mind so that way you can have a holistic, healthy approach to growing your audience, and you're not going to be pulling your hair out as a creator trying to figure out how do I make this all work. All right, so that's what I promise that we'll deliver for you. And then towards the end, we're going to share some of the techniques and strategies that we utilize to help our podcast grow. And so a lot of them I think will be really helpful and illuminating for you as well. But first, let's talk about where you can advertise your podcast. And when we think about digital and digital platforms, we're specifically thinking about not audio, Apple Podcasts, listening to host-read ads or dynamically inserted ads. We're thinking everywhere else online where your listeners could potentially be. And the first place we're going to look at is video platforms. So the two most prominent video platforms would be YouTube, and now Spotify is kind of like the second cousin twice removed that's trying to make their mark in the video platform space as well. What's really great about these platforms is not only can you use them as distribution, there's been lots and lots of talks and discussions at Podcast Movement about YouTube and adding video components to your podcast and having a video distribution strategy. YouTube is the big player for that. And what's really nice about YouTube is that they actually have a built-in ads platform, which you are very well familiar with if you've ever watched a YouTube video without YouTube Premium, and it gets interrupted 15 times between, learning how to change the oil in your car and when you actually get to the end of the video, because everyone wants to throw their ad in your face, right? So YouTube has a very robust ads platform. And the benefit that you have as a podcaster is that you can piggyback on top of that to extend the organic reach of your video content. And so if you are uploading videos to a YouTube channel, whether they're shorts or long-form full episodes or clips, if it's a playlist in a larger channel or a dedicated channel, it doesn't matter. You can actually put campaign dollars behind your video content to expand and extend the reach. And because it's built in, you get a lot of insights and data as far as who is watching your videos, how long they're watching, where they're coming from, are they subscribing, all of those things. And those are all really helpful metrics where when you're trying to grow an audio podcast, it can be challenging because you're just looking at the downloads going up in your hosting platform and you're like, where did they come from? Was it a friend of mine that introduced my podcast to somebody new? Was it because of this paid campaign that I did? It's very difficult to kind of parse out and attribute where traffic comes from. But with YouTube and with Spotify, you can see the one-to-one ratio of where they're coming from and how they're engaging with your content. So that's a big benefit. And Spotify does have a built-in ads platform as well, where you can promote your podcast content, whether it's short videos or short audio clips, inside of their platform, both against podcast and music, and drive people to your page. But with every strength, there's potentially a weakness, and so we're not going to sugarcoat like the benefits without talking about the drawbacks. And with YouTube and Spotify in particular, it's very easy to spend money, which is great, but you want to make sure that you're getting something in return for that money spent, right? So if you want to consider doing video ads on Spotify or on YouTube, make sure to do some research on best practices for running those campaigns, where you can track the results, you can make sure that all the links are working, everything is directed accordingly, and that you're actually going to get a return on your investment on those platforms. The second place that you can consider running digital advertisements for your podcast is on social media platforms. So this would be Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, anywhere where people are congregating in groups, on pages, or in feeds. Because all of these social media platforms also have built-in ads platforms. And while they're tailored to small businesses and direct-to-consumer dropshipping websites and webinars and all those kind of things, you can also leverage those audiences to let them know about your podcast content, whether that's directing them to an audio podcast listening experience on Apple or Spotify, or to a video platform, or if you have a Facebook page or an Instagram profile, you can actually build that following there as well. And one of the things that platforms like Facebook ads, for instance, one of the benefits you have over like a YouTube's ads or a Spotify ads is in the targeting parameters. So Facebook ads in particular, if you're new to advertising, has AI targeting. What does that mean? Well, that means you tell them what you're advertising, who you're advertising to, and they figure out who is the best person to advertise to. Some of it can be a little creepy, like how do you know the perfect listener for my podcast? And they're like, we just know, trust us. And so how much you want to trust them is kind of up to you. But one of the benefits is if you're new to it and you haven't done it before, it's a more efficient way to spend your money to allow Facebook to identify who is the ideal listening audience for this podcast to make sure that your ads are being spent well. One caveat to social media advertising, though, is that it can be very expensive to convert someone from social media to a podcast listener. And there's a couple of reasons for that. The big one, though, is that when you're scrolling on Instagram or you're watching TikTok videos, you're typically in a place where you want short little clips of content, right? You're not trying to stick around for an hour unless you get sucked down the TikTok rabbit hole, right? And that's not typically on purpose. You just want to watch something quick in between meetings while you're waiting for something to heat up in the microwave. You're not looking for a long-term commitment. And so when you're running an advertisement on social media and you're saying, hey, I have this great 1.5 hour interview with a subject matter expert in my field, I think you would really enjoy it, that is a totally different behavior from that person. So they're going from just kind of casually scrolling through social media to let me sit down and really pay attention to this 1.5 hour episode. And so you just have to go in understanding that not everyone is going to be ready right then to listen to your podcast. And that's okay, because the first step is make sure they know that you exist, that your podcast exists, and explain why it's valuable to them. And then over time, they will find their way to your podcast. So just when you go into social media as a way of growing your podcast audience, just understand it may be a little more expensive to get them to convert over as a listener. On the flip side, you can start by spending $5 a day to promote your podcast on a platform like Facebook. And so it requires very little upfront cost in order to get started, but there's some growing pains with it. Hopefully, is this all helpful? Is this good information? I'm hoping this is really great. Awesome. I appreciate the enthusiasm. So the third place that we're going to look is something that not a lot of podcasters are paying attention to, and that's email newsletters. So email has had somewhat of a resurgence recently. It used to be huge in cold outbound sales, sending emails to people that are in, potentially a pipeline for a business transaction. And then recently, as more and more people have started converting from rented landscapes like social media to owned audiences like podcasts, where you have a direct connection with your audience, email has started to become really big. If any of you are following people on Substack or subscribing to Beehive newsletters, that is all the new wave of email marketing and email newsletters. And what makes email really great for podcasters is, ironically, what makes podcasting great for listeners. When someone listens to your podcast, it's not only because they want to hear what you have to say, but it's because they trust you as the spokesperson, as the representative of your ideas. Right? So if you have a business marketing podcast and they listen to every single one of your episodes, it's not because you necessarily are saying something radically different than the 200,000 other business marketing podcasts, but it's because they trust you. It's because they built a relationship with you. I don't know if you've ever run into a listener of your podcast and they start talking about how much they enjoy listening to you, and that episode that you put out 6 months ago about that one random story about your cat, and you're like, I don't know who you are, but this is great. Like, I'm really glad that we have this connection that we've built over time because you listen to my podcast. Email newsletters have a very similar fan-creator connection because it's fully opt-in. I want to read your ideas, your thoughts, the things that you're thinking about and writing about, and I want to get those emails in my inbox, and I'm seeking them out. So what makes that really great as a place to advertise is that when somebody is going to open that email, they have a high level of intent of, I'm seeking this content out. And so as a podcaster, what you want to do is look for people that have newsletters and audiences where you talk about similar topics. So similar to if you're trying to be a podcast guest to expand your audience by being on other people's shows, you want to seek out newsletters where they're writing on topics that you discuss on the podcast. And the reason that's beneficial is because then you can approach them and say, I would love to sponsor your newsletter. And in my advertisement or my promotion, I just want you to tell your readers about my podcast and maybe one or two reasons why they should consider listening to it. And so this is a great way to kind of jump the line directly to a very specific type of listener. Instead of with the video platforms or social media, you're kind of painting more of a broad brush. You're trying to hit them within the masses. Email newsletters are much more targeted and much more curated. And in addition to that, when the email writer features you as an advertisement, the reader sees that as an inherent endorsement of your content because they know that that newsletter real estate is very precious to that writer, that creator. And so if they're willing to platform you and tell them the benefits of listening to your podcasts, then the likelihood that they actually convert as a new listener and check out an episode of your podcast is really high. And so the pro of email newsletters is there's a very high level of engagement and there's a high level of trust with that audience. Because essentially, the person writing the newsletter is endorsing you in one way, shape, or form. Now, there's some, I don't want to call them struggles, but there's some hurdles to overcome to really pull this off effectively. One is identifying who are the email newsletters where my podcast is going to be a good fit. So that's the first thing that you want to think through is, in your industry, in your niche, what you talk about, what are the newsletters that have an overlapping content strategy and an overlapping audience, and then approaching those creators. If it's a smaller creator, they may have never had an ad placed on their newsletter before. And so that becomes very collaborative of how do we make this very integrative, very complementary. They might not even know how to price it. It's like, how do I even price an advertisement for my newsletter? I've never done that before. And so kind of go in with some ideas of here are some ways that we can price this. Here's how it can be beneficial for you. Here's how it can be beneficial for me, and make it very collaborative. For larger newsletters, whether it's on Substack or Beehive, but there are other email providers that do this as well, they will have advertisement marketplaces where you can go in and say, I want to advertise on these types of newsletters, and those newsletters will have, similar to blogs back in the day, spots that are predetermined as available for advertisements. And so you can go into these marketplaces and say, I want to advertise on technology podcasts that talk about, or technology newsletters that talk about AI, because I have an AI technology podcast. And they'll say, great, there's 15 right here that you can advertise in today, and here's the cost to advertise in those. And typically you either pay for reach, a CPM model, which is very similar to how podcast ads can be priced, or CPC, cost per click, where you're actually paying for every single time somebody clicks on the link in that ad to go to your podcast. So those are the two ways that you typically will pay for an ad in a newsletter. If you're working with them directly, you usually will decide on a fixed fee up front. What that gives you, though, is typically you have to commit up front to spending the money without knowing how it's going to work. And so there's more trial and error finding the right fit with the right newsletter that hopefully has a growing audience. Because if they have a growing audience and you can identify that the people that read that newsletter actually came and listened to your podcast, then you know next week when you sponsor it again, there's going to be new people that are now introduced to your advertisement. But if the newsletter isn't growing, then you can sponsor it 3, 4, 5 times, and now everybody's seen your ad, and they've decided if they want to listen to your podcast or not. And so that you can keep advertising there, but eventually your results will start to go away because you've saturated that audience with your message. And so you want to find newsletters that are growing, that are open to working with podcasters to run ads for their content, and there's no guarantee that you're going to get anything. The other kind of caveat with email newsletters is that there's very few things that you can optimize. You can test what type of newsletter you're running it in. You can test where the ad is placed, and you can test like what words you use to describe your podcast. But there's very little like split testing or A/B testing or things you can do to adjust the ad on the fly to figure out what's the best performing version of this podcast promotion inside of this newsletter. And so kind of go into it understanding that this is going to be a test. We're going to see how well this audience takes to my content, likes my content, and then wants to listen to the podcast. And then make sure you're able to track which newsletter these listeners are coming from if you're running multiple ads at the same time. The easiest way to do that is with either a UTM code. So this is just something special you put on the back of the website link that you use, and you can track what the link click traffic is. You can see how many people clicked every single potential link. The other way that you can do it, if you have your own website, is you can set up unique landing pages for every campaign that you have, right? And you can just duplicate a page that already exists and put AI email newsletter on the back of the domain. And so that way, you know, every single person that showed up at that landing page could only come from this email newsletter. And that's another way that you can see where your traffic is coming from and who's actually engaging with your email advertising. All right? I see some shaking heads like, okay, this is good. We should keep going. Awesome. The final place that we'll talk about where to advertise before we shift into practical strategies for ad creation is digital publisher content. And this is where whenever you're on a website, online, you see advertisements. Whether it's an Amazon ad for something that you were looking at and added to your shopping cart 3 days ago, or if it's a random video about a movie that's coming out, we see advertisements all over the place. And those are also places where you could potentially pay to feature your podcast. The benefit of this is that there is never a ceiling to the amount of people that you can reach with digital publishers, because there are trillions of website visits on a particular day, week, month, because we all live and breathe online now. And so anytime somewhere is online, there is an opportunity to reach that person and tell them about your podcast. There's 2 things that make this strategy particularly challenging for creators. The first one is that in order to plug into those pipes where the websites say, I'm willing to accept advertisements in these places, it requires some technical know-how in order to run those ad campaigns and distribute them on publishers in a programmatic fashion. So that would be in an automated fashion where you're running it through an intermediary called an exchange, and they're running the ads on your behalf, and then you're tracking the progress. So that requires some technical know-how. The other way that you would do it is similar to the email newsletter, where you find blogs, you find websites, you find places where that audience overlaps with your audience, and you approach them directly about integrating your podcast as a featured part of their website. So let's say that you have a podcast about homesteading. Let's pick something fun. You like to grow all your own food. And then you find a blog or a website that also talks about homesteading and canning tips and how to preserve your fruits and things like that. And you think this would be a fantastic place to promote my podcast, because if somebody's reading this article, they're going to be interested in this episode of my podcast. So you can approach that blog writer, that website owner, and say, I have a podcast where we talk about similar subjects. I would love to sponsor some pages on your website and feature my podcast. So in a very similar way to an email newsletter, you can approach that with digital publishers and blog style content. But that takes time to develop those relationships. Just like with an email newsletter, you're typically committing to something up front with no guarantee of any kind of result on the back. So those are kind of some of the drawbacks for digital publisher content, but there's millions and millions of websites, and there's millions of places where people are congregating and reading content similar to what you talk about on your podcast. And so if you can identify those, then that could be a great opportunity to get in front of new people that would enjoy your content. So let's talk about how to create a digital podcast ad. There are 3 specific things that you want to keep in mind when you're creating an ad for your podcast, whether it's on an email newsletter, on Facebook ads, on a website. The first one is the visual, the ad creative, whether it's a picture of your podcast artwork, a picture of your guest, a short video clip from your episode if you have video content. What is the thing that you're going to use as your first introduction to this new person? Their very first impression of you and your show. What does that need to be? You'll typically have some written content as well, whether it's a button that says learn more or start listening, a short description, some kind of words that explain the value of your podcast to that person. Next, you'll have wherever you're sending them. So if you're advertising on Facebook or an email newsletter, you're typically going to have a link that sends them somewhere else. Where are you going to send them to? Are you sending them to your website? Are you sending them directly to an app like Apple Podcasts? Are you sending them to YouTube? Decide where you want that person to go once they interact with your ad, and make sure that it's strategically valuable for you. So don't just send them to somewhere because it's the only link you have. Think, if I was this person and I clicked on this link, what would be the best place to send them? There are podcast landing pages sites like Linkfire, where you can create small landing pages that have direct links to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, all these places. You can send them to YouTube, you can send them to your website, but just be very intentional about where you send that person. And then finally, audience targeting parameters. So this is where you decide, who is this person? What are they interested in? What do they want to listen to? How do I make sure I'm reaching them and not someone else? Because the great thing about podcasting is that there is a perfect listener for every single one of us. But the other thing is that there are lots of people that aren't necessarily interested in what we have to say, and that's okay. We're not making the podcast for them. So you want to make sure when you're advertising your podcast, you're reaching the people that are interested. So you're getting the best bang for your buck when you're spending money advertising your podcast. And then finally, before we get into some things that we've learned running these style of campaigns for our podcasters, some tips. These are just some helpful tips and strategies as you embark into this world of digital media buying and advertising for your podcast. The first one is set a budget you're comfortable spending on promotion. For a lot of these strategies, we've talked about how you either have to commit to a certain amount of spend up front and then see how well it works, or on platforms like social media and Facebook where you can spend a little bit a day without really knowing what the return is going to be or how much it's going to cost. Understand that whenever you start anything new in marketing, you're testing first. You're learning, you're gathering information, you're becoming educated about what works and what doesn't for your show. So make sure that you don't overextend and spend more than you really should when you're in that info gathering phase. Once you figure out something that works and you understand, oh, it cost me $8 to get someone from Facebook to listen to an episode of my podcast, and that's worth it for me. Now I'll spend more than $5 a day. Now I'll spend $20 a day, right? But just make sure in the beginning that you set a budget that you're comfortable with, that's not going to make you overextend or really, put you in a pickle. The second tip, and this is really important, is track your results. It's very easy to set up these kinds of campaigns where you're paying to promote your content and you have no way of knowing if it's working. Because what you don't want to do is just throw your money down the toilet and keep doing it because you don't know any better, because you're not actually tracking. Are people clicking this link that I've set up? When they click it, are they going to the right place? Am I seeing more people listen to my episodes in my podcast host analytics? Am I seeing more people show up to my website? make sure that you have in place the things that you want to track to make sure that what you're doing is actually working, and know how to adjust when you see that something is kind of working, but you think it could work a little bit better. And then the third tip is just have a target in mind for what success looks like for you. Every podcast is different. Every audience is different. Every creator is different. And ultimately for you, you have to decide what's worth it and what does success look like. Success might not be 100,000 people listening to every episode. It might be 500 of the right people listening to your episodes. And so figure out what does success look like, and then reverse engineer how can I get there, potentially using paid advertising in addition to word of mouth, posting on social media, telling your friends and family about it, all of the things that you should be doing to get the word out about your podcast. So from here, Brett's going to chime in and talk about some of the things that we've learned building audience lift, testing a lot of these strategies, testing a lot of these placements, and working with podcasters that want to grow their audience and reach more people.
Great. So thanks, Travis. That was really helpful. So we developed a system for podcasters, basically a very low-touch system that will essentially drive creator growth and listeners to your podcast. For audio, we basically have two products. One that takes people to our player, and the second that takes people into Apple. Our program is a self-service program, so you can actually log in Audience Lift, create an account really simply. And what we keyed in on was that the trailer of a podcast was a very underutilized marketing tool. Great. So we keyed in on the fact that the trailer was a very underutilized marketing tool. And so the first thing you do is you upload an MP3 file on our system. And that's simply a best practice, is like a 60-second trailer that really describes what your podcast is about. Because this trailer on our system is going to go on our publisher network. We have 100,000 publisher partners, and we're going to contextually place it in relevant articles for you. So if your podcasting is about Formula One or the Indy 500, and there's a podcast called Pit Pass Indy, we're going to place that on sites like ESPN that are talking about Formula One. And the hope is that when a reader is reading an article, your podcast is placed inside that article, and the first step is they can listen to your trailer of the podcast. Okay?
Yeah, so this is taking some of those concepts that we talked about, and this is a specific application, right? So we have the ad creative. We're using audio trailer as a preview for your podcast. We're finding people that are in similar spaces on similar websites where they're interested in the things that you talk about, and then placing it there, right? So this is an application of some of the principles we talked about earlier.
Right. The greatest thing is, too, about our system is all you need to do is come with the same artwork that you used for Apple or Spotify and your MP3 file, and then on our system, you actually make the ad. So that's a very helpful feature for you. And then you can preview the ad to see what it's going to look like for the listener. Then what we do is we get people to listen to that ad or your trailer. Then each trailer advertisement has a subscribe and listen button. About 40% of the people who listen to your trailer will hit that subscribe and listen button. And on their phone, what will happen, it will prompt them to see if they would like to receive push notifications about your upcoming episodes. We do that on your behalf. We send them the push notifications. People will opt in, and now we're building a subscriber database of people who wanted to receive push notifications for you as the podcaster. Once people opt in, and it's fully opt-in, which is nice, 24 hours later, we will send them a push notification on their browser of their phone saying, hey, remember that cool Indy Pit Pass podcast that you saw the trailer of yesterday? Here's their latest episode. Click here to listen. At that point, people will either go to our podcast player to listen or into Apple, depending on the type of advertising program that you purchase for us. Our podcast program and advertising programs start at $500 a campaign.
Yeah.
The good thing is you are going to get the outcome you want. You're going to be on the website, so it's advertised for you, and you're going to get people to listen and download your podcast, and you'll see real growth out of it.
Yeah. And then we're running out of time. We also have some best practices and things that we've learned running YouTube campaigns as well. The first one is make sure that you're getting multiple touch points with your audience. Make sure that you're strategic and you're targeting for geographies if you're running YouTube campaigns. And then what we see as best practice is aim for quality over quantity when it comes to YouTube. Now, we ran out of time, unfortunately. Hopefully this was really helpful. We are at booth 507. We're also going to stick around on the stage if you want to ask questions about any of the things that we talked about, learn more about the platform that we built and how we help podcasters grow. But hopefully this has been really helpful and illuminating, and you can walk away with some practical things to do to help grow your audience moving forward. Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.